And we're live.
All right. This is Plant Daddy Podcast, serving you intersectional horticulture. I'm Matthew.
And I'm Steven.
So, we are just here today recording a little supplementary information to accompany our second episode, which was our first Plant Daddy Podcast off topic. We mostly talk about plants on Plant Daddy Podcast, but sometimes we venture into other topics, and they're usually gay. But these are basically just going to be our off topic episodes and something to look forward to in the future when you get bored of us talking about plants. So, something that we're really getting into a conversation. We're gonna just veer off into topics that we don't necessarily know.
Yeah, I think this one, this is kind of news and topical. I think, Matthew, you came across these facts. We alluded to this in a previous episode, right? And we're sort of following up on something that we thought we would investigate.
Yeah, we just want to make sure that when we bring up topics that we don't know enough about, that we do them justice later on through little mini episodes like this one.
Yeah, and really, I think every other disclaimer exists here as well, right? Neither of us is we're not historians.
We're not experts.
Yeah, but this is what we've, brought together, and it'd be great to get feedback too if there's something that we missed or anything like that.
Yeah, we basically just think that it's important to know your history, and especially when we talk about things that came up in the Seattle Pride episode, that they deserve a little bit more attention than what we were able to say in the moment. So, the two topics that we're going to discuss today are the Institut for Sexualwissenschaft, and I don't know how that sounds to German speakers. Sorry, I am German, but I don't speak the language.
So I think, okay, from what I understand, I think you got it right, except the end. I think it should be Wissenschaft.
Wissenschaft. Okay.
Yeah,
Institut for Sexualwissenschaft.
I don't think anybody can Google that, and we'll just have to print it somewhere.
Yeah. And then our second topic is the rise in hate crime in our own neighborhood, Capitol Hill in Seattle, Washington. So first, we're going to talk about the Institut for Sexualwissenschaft, which in English is known as the Institute of Sex Research, the Institute of Sexology, or the Institute for the Science of Sexuality. Those are all various translations, and you'll find information looking for any of them. So, this was a nonprofit private research institute that was operating in Berlin, Germany from 1919 to 1933. It was headed by Magnus Hirschfeld, who was both gay and Jewish. He was the head of the Science Humanitarian Committee and pioneered for the rights and liberation of the LGBT community that was flourishing in a pre-Nazi Berlin. So Hirschfeld himself compiled an extensive library that was focused on gay love and eroticism, and these also included books that he himself wrote on topics of gender variance in early 20th century Germany, which had a thriving drag scene and transgender community.
So when we were talking about this before, I brought up watching, the first bits of the movie Cabaret, which I think is available now on Netflix, at least as of this recording.
Yeah.
And just mentioning, wow, this was Berlin. I didn't even understand at first where this was set. And then I admitted that I fell asleep 15 minutes later. I think it was one of those ones I started at night, but...
Old musicals are sometimes really long.
Yeah, I do feel like it was one that I'm is this going to get started ever? But it was a fascinating sort of setting and made me think about that a little bit.
I remember when I saw the movie, I was completely blown away. And this was a number of years ago when I was a baby gay. But I was really surprised at how rich and diverse the community that they were representing and showing in that musical were. Especially considering what I knew about World War II and Nazis and kind of the attitudes towards homosexuality at the time, which were just a travesty. So This movie to me was really eye-opening, and this is a story that was taking place exactly in the time and setting of this institute.
And just now that I'm thinking about this a bit more, Matthew, did you see the show Transparent on
Yes.
Amazon? So
yeah.
Did they have scenes from pre-war Berlin too? I feel
Oh
like
gosh.
this would have been in the third or fourth season. They were having these
Oh
flashbacks.
yeah. So
Was that the
I have
one?
kind of soured on Jeffrey Tambor, and I got behind, and I stopped watching.
Yeah, that would have been right around the time of those accusations, I think.
Is this something that I should go back and watch, despite Jeffrey Tambor?
Um, wow. That's a big topic. I think the show is worthwhile,
Okay,
honestly. And then they're having a musical finale. I don't know if you heard about that.
I did not.
So I think, honestly, I think you should. So
Okay.
it's a musical finale without him.
Well, these are things that I'm into.
Yes.
Not Jeffrey Tambor
Anyway,
musicals.
yeah, but there were a bunch of flashback scenes that I think that show was very dense to me. So it was sort of dense and like full of sort of Jewish history a little bit. And I think these were Berlin flashbacks. I'm not completely sure. Anyway, I'm just bringing that up. And anyway, so that maybe these are some representations of this time in film and TV that you can see.
Well, so there's actually a really good example of a film that centers around exactly what we're talking about, and I'm going to come to that in just a little bit.
Okay.
But there was definitely some controversy with it, and I'm sure that there's at least a couple of listeners. If we have any of them yet, Stephen, do you think that we have any listeners?
There are none posted, so
So we
yes.
don't, yeah.
I'm just trying to keep Matthew going. Yes.
Okay, yes, cool. Okay, so all of our listeners might know a little bit about this, but we'll get to that in a minute. So, the Institute, which I will call it heretofore, included it included medical, psychological, and ethnological divisions. And it also offered marriage and sex counseling offices, and it drew around 20,000 people annually to receive individual care.
Marriage and sex counseling. That to me is so forward thinking.
Yeah, and
That
obviously
I'm
they
like,
didn't have gay marriage, but I think that they were dealing with a lot of patients who were coming with a variety of what were considered like sexual disorders at the time. And if you were married,
Oh.
perhaps you were going to receive some kind of counseling because like it turned out that it's not that he's impotent, it's that he's gay.
Wow.
I don't know. I'm actually just speculating there on what marriage and sex counseling constituted at this institute, but yeah, totally forward thinking. It was extremely progressive at the time, and in fact, I feel like what we're talking about now feels kind of like it's happening like modern day now because there's so little data on transgender just identity in general, and they're often not included in a lot of studies on sex and sex identity and gender identity. So I think that they probably had some really cutting edge stuff that we're like still now trying to recreate or to regather. So basically, the Institute was a huge advocate for the sexual education of just people who were there. It's always better if you have more information, and a lot of people didn't at that time. So they were really pioneering in that front. There was also a lot of focus on contraception, which can sometimes be a topic that I know currently in modern treatment of HIV and AIDS in a lot of resource poor areas, there is a huge amount of conflict over whether or not contraception is viable, because if it's like Catholic missionaries, you don't believe in contraception, but that's the number one way to prevent or reduce transmission of HIV. So all of these things that Hirschfeld was doing, we still see problems today that exist that he was trying to fix in the early 20th century. So he also dealt with treatment of STIs and women's emancipation and like free rights, extending to multiple communities who didn't have it, blah, blah, blah. He was really forward thinking, basically. So he was actually the first one to coin the term transsexualism, and he included transgender people among the staff and clients at the Institute, which was huge at the time. There were, I believe, over 40 people working on the staff who identified as a gender other than the one they had been assigned at birth. And these are people
Wow.
who typically would not have access to professional jobs if they were actually like living that life, how they conform. Yeah, they were also some of the first people to offer modern modern at the time, gender affirmation surgeries in the 1930s. And so this is where, if you're a film person, you've probably heard of The Danish Girl, which was controversial because Freddie Redmayne, who is a straight cisgender man playing a transgender character, I don't know how I necessarily feel about the conversation of the representation in film and whether the actor should be what he's portraying or what she is portraying. But this was definitely something that people were questioning, like, why didn't you cast a transgender woman instead of Freddie Redmayne?
Yeah, I think an interesting thing there is, like, when I think of that movie, The Danish Girl, that feels like 30 years ago in sort of the lifetime of trans representation in film and media, at least that I'm aware of.
Yeah,
right?
and yet
Which
it
I
wasn't
feel like
even
it's
that long ago.
It was not that long ago.
Yeah.
Was it like 3 years ago? Or
Oh,
not,
it was
5?
It was probably within 5,
Wait,
but
did he win the?
he won an Academy
Oh,
Award for
yeah.
his performance, which, objectively was fantastic. He did a
But-
wonderful job in that movie, and so did Alicia Vikander.
Yeah, just to sort of, insert myself in this a little bit, I just feel like, for me, I would not have thought that was strange, really, then. Even then, not really.
But now
Where
it's
I'm
like-
that's very odd that
Yeah.
you would have Eddie Redmayne play a trans character.
Which I think shows the progress that we've made on this
Yeah,
topic,
maybe. Yeah,
just as a
okay.
culture in a very short amount of time, that when he was cast, it became controversial, but it was like first wave controversy. That was when Scarlett Johansson was still playing Asian roles. Yeah, I think that Scarlett Johansson should only play non-human roles, because honestly, she's best in those. And I love Under the Skin, and I
yes.
love her. I think that she's fantastic when she's playing a character who does not have DNA.
I'm just gonna let that hang, audience. Okay, I love that. There's no follow-up comment.
Okay.
Yes. No, you're so right.
Yeah, well, yeah. But so whether or not you appreciate Freddie Redmayne's contribution to the scientific film study of the Danish Girl, it depicted when she had a sexual reassignment surgery, which is actually, I think, more respectfully referred to now as gender confirmation surgery. She actually died from complications in 1931 of that. But the interesting thing that connects is that she went to this institute, and she was one of their patients.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So there's your last film connection that I'm going to come up with. But things went to shit in early 1933. In February, the Nazi Party began its crackdown on homosexuality, and this included raiding clubs, outlawing sex publications, and banning organized sex groups, which I was actually really struck with, like, what is an organized sex group? And
I
they...
just assume that's like an identity circle, an orientation. Or what is
Okay.
it?
Well, I actually didn't research this, but I was imagining that it was more of like the kind of
Like
club that you get referred
Like
into.
swingers clubs or a sex
Yeah,
club or
maybe
something.
kind of like Eyes Wide Shut, but like the
Oh.
Gay Berlin version.
Well, it could be either.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, this is
I mean,
something.
sex group. I feel like you're probably right. I mean, I guess I don't know where you got this, but yeah.
Yeah.
No, who would call it a sex group?
Yeah.
Like, anyway.
Well,
Okay.
but they became targeted for this. And all of this was actually like legal at the time. The way that they were using existing law that was already in place prior to Nazi control, it was all just exploitation of existing laws. So Hirschfeld actually was fortunately in France giving a talk at the point when Nazis raided the Institute. And this essentially spared him from the fate of the Institute's main administrator, who was ultimately sent to concentration camps in March. In May, the Institute's library and archives were drug out onto the street to be burned publicly. And this destroyed over 20,000 books and 5,000 images and countless journals and medical records that were all notes about, the research that was being done there. So this was just the beginning of anti-gay atrocities that were taking place in Germany at the time. And the following year, strict Nazi-era law was put into place that basically was accompanied by a purge and roundup of gay men And many of these people were actually identified from lists of addresses and names that they found in the Institute's records. So many tens of thousands of people were ultimately sent to concentration and death camps for their status as an LGBTQ person. So, yeah.
Terrible.
Yeah. So,
So yeah, I mean, Matthew kind of paused for comment there. I just feel like
Stephen has to
these
take this
things,
in.
yeah, it's just this is the kind of stuff where it's like there's no comment that can capture that, right? I mean, it's just
It's,
like it's
I don't know if
crazy
you'd
to
call
think
it
about.
genocide because they were obviously doing a genocide against the Jewish ethnicity, and being gay isn't an ethnicity, but
Yeah, or sometimes when I think about these things, I'm kind of struck by how incomprehensible it is to think about it happening, in your own world, right? Or in your own life, and just how sort of recent these things were when you think about how cataclysmic it was. Like
yeah.
just what, I mean, not 100 years ago, these things were happening. And just to imagine it happening now, I can't kind of wrap my head around it even.
Well,
So I feel sort of like, God, you're ill prepared. Like, why can't you? And all of those feelings. So that's kind of where my head goes, anyway.
yeah. And really small, but a lot of people were able to get out in time to avoid this. And among them was Hirschfeld, who was basically exiled in France. He was able to stay there until the end of his life. He did try to reestablish the Institute in Paris, but he didn't succeed and died of a heart attack on his birthday in 1935, actually.
Oh wow!
I,
So he wasn't even there for the duration of the war or something.
no, I believe he was 67 when he died.
Wow.
But yeah. So the Institute building was actually just repurposed by the Nazis, like many buildings were at that time. And I think it was actually like basically shelled out by bombs in 1944, and then in the mid 50s, the ruins were demolished. So this place doesn't even exist anymore. Much of what was lost in the burning of the library and records is just straight up irrecoverable, and these include detailed notes about really finely nuanced surgical procedures for individual patients, writing that detailed the thoughts and stories of people, and studies on the LGBTQ community. And a lot of this was because Hirschfeld understood the importance of research on LGBTQ people, and if it wasn't happening outside of the community, like it had to come from somewhere. So he started it within the community. And this was both to support the community's struggle for equality, but also to validate our own existence as gay people in the fields of science and philosophy. So, I mean, ultimately, the attempted eradication of queer people during Nazi control of Germany had really long-lasting impact on our community, both in Germany and also, by extension, globally. In addition to the mass murders that were committed, by burning the library and its records, they destroyed an astonishing amount of research and knowledge, and that sent the message that not only was the very existence of LGBTQ people unacceptable, but that we would never be counted and seen as people even if we continued to exist. And it's really important to keep in mind, given our modern political climate, that the erasure of this early research institute and the Nazi attacks on the LGBTQ community were possible through the exploitation of existing laws. And the laws didn't begin to change to become even more draconian and persecutory until some sentiment of like normalization had begun to occur. And so this didn't just happen overnight, it was by increments. And I feel like we're really seeing that today in a lot of ways, especially in how the public rhetoric on immigrants and refugees and many other minoritized communities, obviously the transgender community, are
Yeah.
constantly fighting for some recognition.
That's the one that sticks up to me. Yeah, I mean, like trans military ban, and then you hear kind of other rumblings about. There was something recently, and I honestly don't know how true this is or how far this got, but this story about, the potential of, service providers and other services to deny service to trans people. So
Yeah.
they were including, I want to say it was ambulance drivers, and really,
Are you
I
serious?
don't see. And this was something that I feel like they were talking about in the sense that, like, oh, maybe this would be a good idea, but and maybe in like political circles, right? So I don't want to make it sound like this got really far.
Right.
Also, I
But the
don't
thought was
have,
brought up.
yeah, just that the fact that this is sort of being spoken about in any
That it's even
circle,
being questioned.
yeah, I think is the sort of thing that I think would have been hard to imagine, I don't know, 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Back when it was still okay for Freddie Redmayne to play a transgender woman.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Already contradictory a little bit. Anyway, so these things are moving in different directions, maybe, but whatever.
Yeah. Well, one of the lasting effects of this, specifically in Germany, was that these Nazi-era laws remained in place in East Germany until 1968.
So
And
sorry, do you know which laws these are generally, or like under what umbrellas of, like, was it like a morality laws? Was it like subversive?
that's actually a good
Hates.
question that I don't have an answer to.
Okay, yeah,
But it
it'd be
was,
interesting to look into that a little bit.
yeah, like as far as my understanding goes, it's like the criminalization of the homosexual
Okay, well, maybe
identity.
all right.
And I don't know if that was just limited to
Maybe like sex acts that were being talked about were illegal
right.
or something.
Yeah,
like that.
I don't think that it was limited to just that. There was also a lot of like a lot of problem for people who were cross-dressing, whether they were
Okay.
transgender or whether they were drag performers, whatever reason a man had to put on men's clothing or vice versa. Those individuals were definitely targeted as being like sexual minorities who had like problems with them.
Yeah, and I think even in the United States, right? Like they talk about in, some
Well,
of the Stonewall
Stonewall,
stories,
yeah.
right? It was like you had to have certain numbers of like articles of men's clothing versus not. And I don't know
Yeah.
if this was like a
And if
New
you
York
were-
City code or what exactly, but yeah,
Yeah.
talk about this.
And I was hearing about how if you were wearing women's clothing, they had a female police officer at Stonewall who, like, in the women's bathroom was checking your gender so
Wow.
that they could then, like, cite you for, I don't know how they would cite it, but it's like, well, you're dressed as a woman, so you must be a woman. Oh, you got a dick. Well,
Wow.
off to prison or jail, whatever. Yeah. But, yeah. So East Germany obviously was more liberal after the Berlin Wall came down, or was put up. I mean, so they repealed
Sorry,
these.
West Germany, you're saying?
No, well, I'm talking about. Yes, sorry.
Yeah.
East Germany.
I was going to be shocked. I was like, wow.
Yeah, no. Communist Germany basically kept those laws until 1994, but good Germany repealed them in 1968, which was still like decades later. And it wasn't until 2017 that the German government actually overturned the convictions of 50,000 gay men that were hangers-on from the Nazi-era law, and only 5,000 of those 50,000 men were still alive. And there might have been non-men there too, gender non-conforming
Yeah,
women.
it's like a terribly small number.
Yeah. Way too little, way too late. So yeah, in summary, I think that this is an example of the power of knowledge and everything that was gained through research and study at the Institute being destroyed took a huge chunk of knowledge and the power that comes with it from the queer community and our standing in the world.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think there's a feeling like you get so much, like there's like a powerful normalization that can happen, right? Like to know that there's a library studying this, to know that there's an institute for this, right?
Yeah.
I think it makes an idea more sort of acceptable. There's more sort of rigor to it. If someone's trying to understand it, they could go to this library, right?
Yeah.
So taking that away, I think, can have so many effects.
Yeah, both like
It's a huge
psychological
loss.
and academic.
Yeah.
It's really ingrained in people what the power of knowledge, I keep saying, but the power of like the study of a type of person and a whole identity. When you erase that, you're basically saying that it doesn't matter and that it doesn't exist.
So, Matthew, how did you read about this or hear about this initially? I don't know if you covered that last time. I don't remember.
So I believe that I actually heard about this just through like general, like learn your history, gay pride kind of publication.
Okay.
And this to me is a big example of we are gay men who exist in this world that is so much better to us now than it was 100 years ago. And we're free to walk down the street holding hands with our partners. And we're really enjoying this great moment in human history that even though it doesn't seem like
We're free to have a plant podcast.
yeah, like
It's
this is
like-
we're living the dream, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, but where was I going with that?
So where you heard about it and read about it.
Yeah, like I feel like I have a responsibility to learn things about the history of my people. And like sure, I'm German, Hungarian, and French, and I know my family history in that respect, but that's not the same as my queer family history. Like we are all like brothers, sisters, non-binary, trans people together, and we have been a community that has really struggled in a lot of ways. Not all of us have struggled individually, but we're all impacted by this together. And I think that there is something, I don't want to be like critical of people who don't see the importance of this, but I don't see how you can't want to know more. I think that there's something really sad about individuals who don't know this history of our queer family.
Yeah, or you hope they come around to some curiosity about that or some realization
Yeah.
of like it's important to attempt, right?
Yeah.
I think for me it's so often this identity and movement in the broadest sense, like it feels kind of young compared to other things you study, right? Or like, oh, it hasn't existed, and I know that's not true, but this to me is
Yeah,
an
gay
interesting
people have been around
example.
as long as there have been people.
Yeah, of course, but I think it's like you can't really read the history of Russia necessarily. Like, there's not the same continuity, right?
Yeah.
And this to me is that's an interesting piece that yeah, you knew about, like I knew about persecution in this time, but okay, wow, this institution that was being built, like that's an interesting tidbit that I didn't know anything about. So that's
Well, and there is so much erasure of gay identity throughout history. So many times, some queer person did something great, but the history books don't record that part. So now we have to parse together, like, oh, it turns out that actually Tchaikovsky was like super fucking gay. And like, that's not the version that Russia wants the world to know about one of their national figures. And it's this visibility that's really critical, and I think that we owe it to find those parts of stories that weren't given to us in our study or learning of history throughout
yeah.
school, because you're never going to open up a textbook, or at least I wasn't when I was in school, that credits people with the queerness that like was hugely significant in their lives. There's so many artists, there's so many writers, and like that's not part of their history, so that's then not part of our history.
So, and part of this too, like, not to shift the topic here, but just the idea that you're like, hey, you know what, we need this. I'm gonna make a library. Like, I love that.
Yeah,
That's so bold and so impressive.
it was really
Like, it makes me wanna
transversive.
it makes me want to read about this person more. What was his name?
His name was
we're
Hirschfeld,
scrolling.
but I don't remember his first name. Magnus Hirschfeld.
Just like, wow. So,
Yeah,
yeah, very, very cool. Very
pioneering
sad.
visionary for like the medical and sexual research.
Yeah, in a time when people will be like, "What the hell?" and or you're going to prison.
Right.
So, wow.
So yeah. Now, the next topic that we were going to talk about was the rise in hate crime in Seattle. And that is like something that is centered in Capitol Hill, which is the neighborhood that we both live in. And it's sort of the gayborhood. It's where A lot of the gay bars are centered, and that demographic is shifting over time, like they always do. But it's still like traditionally the gay spot. So, since 2012, the the Seattle Office of City Auditor reported earlier this year, I think in May, that there is a 346% increase in crimes motivated by bias.
Okay.
So,
Right.
yeah,
And this is like all types of hate crimes? Is that how we call
yeah.
it here?
Uh,
Or,
Yeah, so 215 total reported crimes with a bias element occurred in 2018, along with 125 that were categorized as malicious harassment. Then an additional 181 were categorized as non criminal bias incidents. So,
okay.
in particular, hate crimes that had a racial element were the most common subset, and they increased by 427% since 2012. That's just adding race into the picture really dramatically increases the amount of bias that people have against you. So, in addition to that, the largest increase of any crime was assault with a hate element. That rose by 524% over the same period since 2012.
Wow. Okay. This is, yeah. Well, these are crazy numbers, but this is like these categories. This
Yeah,
is interesting, actually, to me to
I
read.
I'd be really
So,
interested to see how they categorize on like a larger scale.
yeah, and maybe
Be
we can link or something at some point to like some of the documents that you looked at. 'Cause yeah, I'm gonna look at this as
this
well.
really
This is,
made big news because it came out, I think, I don't know when the city announced this, but it was published and discussed by a lot of news sources in
okay.
early May, which of course leading into Pride Month of June,
Yeah.
like there's always a little bit more gay media happening around
Yeah,
June.
the interesting thing to me, bias element versus hate element. That's very. I didn't
Yeah,
know we had these
like
distinctions like that.
degrees.
Yeah,
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I don't know how many of these are like violent gay bashings that required like significant medical treatment
Yeah,
versus how many
it
of them were just someone
really.
calling a hate slur from a car.
Yeah, and I don't want to make my sort of interrogation of this sound like it's skepticism or something. It's really like this is way more information than I thought. Actually,
Yeah.
this is an interesting sort of categorization that I didn't even know
Yeah.
about.
And so,
Huh.
of course, like the way that you slice and dice these numbers can tell any number of stories,
Yeah.
but you can just see that there are more incidents of these. Now, what do you mean when you say incidents, Matthew? I mean reported ones because like this is data based on reported incidents, and there could be plenty more that have occurred in past years where people just felt like, well, yeah, this is just part of what living is like. And I actually just binge watched all of. Have you seen Tales of the City?
Okay, I'm watching it right now, ever
Okay.
so slowly, and I started with the old one.
Okay.
Or did you watch the old one or not?
Yeah, in
Okay.
fact, actually, like back when I was a kid, my dad would rent like DVDs of shows and miniseries, and we'd watch them as a family. And this was one that he brought home and we watched.
Wow.
Yeah, and so,
Have you ever asked him, was this on purpose? Do you know?
well, I never really thought about it because we watched a lot of television, like Roots, like we watched the whole Roots series and stuff like
Huh,
that had
okay.
come out in like classic TV
Interesting, yeah.
series. But I didn't really think about whether or not he got this one deliberately, suspecting that he had a little gay
Like to
son.
tell you to move to San Francisco
Yeah,
or
well, this was
something?
like way before I was out. This was
Okay.
way before I was like even out to myself. And so Brian and I watched the new season that Netflix just put out last month.
I haven't seen any of the new season.
Okay, I'm not going to give you any spoilers. Don't worry. Nothing
Is
really.
it really spoilable? From I mean,
I
the
was just
sense
about
that
to
I'm
say like
getting
it's
from
not
the
like
series,
anything
like it's a
happens.
nice saunter
Anna
that if you
Madrigal
want to
like has a
go.
moment. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Laura Linney does that thing.
Yeah.
No, but basically, Brian and I started rewatching it, and
Uh huh.
I'm gonna say I've watched the series twice. Both of
Okay.
those times were before like 2012. So
Hmm.
like I was pretty young, and it was closer in time to when it was filmed. It was filmed in the 90s,
90s. Yeah.
and like it took place in the late 70s,
70s.
early 80s. So I think that the amount of disconnect and like time from when it was filmed kept me from seeing how dated it was going to look now. Because when I go back and watch it, it feels like an old TV show.
It really does, or it seems like it was made for a school or something almost. Like
Yeah.
the budget seems so low to me.
Well,
but
part of it might be that it was a mini series instead of being like a straight up TV show.
Yeah.
And I think that was like really a form that the 90s had a lot of. I remember like the BBC miniseries of Jane Austen adaptations that I always loved.
Yeah.
How did my dad know that he had a queer son? Yeah, he brought these things into my life. But so Brian and I were watching the original series, and just the number of times that Anna Madrigal like whips out some pot and is like, "Here, smoke some weed."
Yeah,
and
it's
like
a lot.
yeah, and there's also like pretty explicit like gay sexual content. I don't know why my dad brought that home, because he was a fairly conservative like Catholic dude. He would fast forward through any moments that were like sexual in movies when we were watching them as kids. He was like weirdly okay with violence. Like violence was okay.
Well, that's pretty standard American.
Yeah,
isn't it?
like
It's
swearing.
like you can't touch the breast, but you can blow it up. It's
Right.
like that kind of.
Yeah. Yeah, you can blow up a woman, but you better not look at her tits.
Don't grow up her.
Yeah,
Don't
that
grow-
actually
not
is
grow
a
up is not the right word. No. But like, don't be sexual.
Yeah. As long as there's no sexual element, you can do
Yes,
whatever you
can
want to
definitely
anybody
kill
else.
anybody.
So, but Brian was like, "Did your dad get this? Like, for
Well,
queer
what's
TV
not
for?"
to get? I mean, she is packing blunts for half of the episodes I've watched so far, right?
That's like
Dinner
one of
party
her
blunts,
character
midnight
traits.
blunts. Like,
She is an older trans lady who smokes tons of marijuana.
wait, she's trans?
Oh, I
Oh my
did just
God.
spoil it.
Oh my god.
Oh,
I listen. I've been watching it in the background. Okay.
Okay, so that's actually like the one thing that I can't
know,
spoil.
Wait, was it okay? But was it revealed, or was I supposed to just know?
No, it'll be revealed in like the last episodes.
my God.
Someone's blackmailing her because they know about her, and it turns out that it's
Oh wait, it's becoming okay. That kind of makes sense because I'm kind of
Okay.
like, oh wait, what's the deal? Why is she so stressed about this? Considering she's so high, like you know.
yeah. She has like a whole
No, don't worry. It's not spoiled. I was kind of watching this as like a background, like
Yeah.
interesting history. Like I keep hearing people, talking about the series and.
yeah.
Okay. Anyway, back to the
Well,
story.
yeah, so-
I mean, we could like. Bring
oh
this
my
back.
gosh, yeah,
Remember
back-
that? Remember we were talking
So,
about hate crimes.
What were we talking about?
Hate crimes.
Yeah, but we were talking about hate crimes, and I specifically brought up Tales of the City.
Oh, you were, I don't know, because I don't know anything about Tales from the City, right?
Okay.
So-
Right.
Wait, vulnerable people? We were talking about hate crime. Oh, maybe the types of crime? Because I was talking about, all right, there's hate incidents, there's bias incidents, there's reporting versus not. Many people aren't reporting them.
Yeah. Well,
Anyway,
oh, yeah, thank
Okay.
you. That actually brought me right back to my point.
okay.
Thank you for bearing with us. So there were just scenes depicting life in San Francisco when a young Anna Madrigal moved there, where, well, and this is also depicted like in Pose. This is depicted in so many TV shows that are kind of set in that time period. Like, your existence is just to be tormented and bullied. And I think that if people know that their daily experience will probably include getting yelled at or something thrown at them or even like physically assaulted, that just sort of becomes a thing that you normalize into your routine, the way that I brush my teeth in the morning or the way that like, you just exist. So the fact that we have this increase in reporting might be an indicator that people are feeling more protected by their local law enforcement, so they'll reach out. Maybe they're suddenly aware, they're like, oh shit, this behavior is not okay and I don't have to tolerate it.
Okay,
So
yeah, empowered by the, maybe some of the energy from these movements, right?
Yeah.
Like to be more vocal, to, stand up and say what's happening.
yeah, and I think that there are probably, a little bit of both elements at play where, there are more of them, but also people are feeling better about coming forward about it, which that is also great. So even if these statistics are at least like semi-inflated by people's increased willingness to report, that's a win. Like, that is something going right in society.
Yeah. So I
That,
think, yeah,
yeah.
I hear what you're saying. Yeah. So maybe, so just to say it another way, right? Like part of this increase, it could be, people being comfortable enough to come forward, thankfully. Terrible that it's happening, and really what it points to is there was less talk about it in the past, sadly.
Yeah.
But anyway,
Yeah. So, kind of in matching with the statistics that Seattle reported based on the increase from 2012 to 2019, um, they the FBI's national crime statistics that were published last year reported a 32% increase in hate crimes in the whole state of Washington between 2016 and 17. So I don't know how these, like, the methodology of their statistics compares. I don't know what they're classifying or how they're classifying it, but we have multiple sources that are seeing this increase of hate crimes. Now, it's obviously not just all based on gay identity. There was a case at the Temple de Hirsch Sinai Temple here on Capitol Hill where there was graffiti that included Nazi rhetoric and symbols. There were bomb threats and fires. Like, stuff like that is also happening to the Jewish community. And, like, of course, like always, transgender people are targeted, like,
yeah,
way higher than anybody else. You constantly hear news stories about queer people of color, trans people of color getting beaten up in public, getting hate crimed in the streets. Like, a lot of transgender women are dying, and that's entirely preventable, or at least it should be. But yeah, so a lot of the community leaders that were interviewed for the pieces in some of Seattle's coverage, a lot of them kind of all seem to suggest that this is coinciding with a shift in national tone that is basically like empowering people with bigoted and racist views. They'd previously felt shamed into the margins because of, like, PC culture. But now that we have kind of shifted over into this, like, post politically correct, like, upside down, like,
moment.
yeah, like this moment that just won't go away. It's really giving them a lot of license to express these toxic views and act on them. So part of it may come from ethnic pride, but it also just indicates a desire to bully the vulnerable and marginalized members of our society and community. And, like, basically that's like anyone who isn't a straight white cisgender man, especially if they're from a Christian background. So we are part of that scene, but I think that there's definitely this element that Stephen and I touched on in our Pride episode, where we were commenting on the increased amount of security that we felt like we were seeing, and how that was so bizarre that your immediate thought is like, oh yeah, we're safe. But on the other hand, like, we're safe because someone wants to hurt us. Like, people are trying to keep us from being hurt, which is great, but, like, those people exist.
Yeah.
We also agreed, though, that neither of us felt unsafe at any point. And
Yeah. And it's interesting to kind of think about this. And this is after that episode. I was walking with a friend who lives just a couple blocks away, and he said he feels less and less safe here. He's lived here for maybe 6 or 8 years.
does he have any incidents that, like, helped him to feel less safe?
You know what? I think for him, it's crime reports that he's reading about that happen really close to his house. I don't know of any incidents that he himself has experienced. For me, I I don't feel unsafe right now.
That's
And
because
the
you're in your
only
living room.
well, he's literally, 3 stories up, sitting in one of those reclining IKEA chairs that everyone owns.
The Poang.
Oh, wow.
I think that's what they're called.
You're probably right.
I've memorized the IKEA catalog.
So, but I would say, for me, it really, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I was living near Cal Anderson Park here, in Seattle. And there were a bunch of muggings that were happening at night, And then I heard more and more about muggings happening on non-main roads, like after midnight. And
Hmm.
this was maybe a year or two or a summer or two. And then that problem was tackled, or my sense is that it was like there was just a ton of police presence in the park for, I mean, I don't know, that period of time. And then it kind of went away. And sort of the idea of it went away. So I felt unsafe then. So relatively, I feel more safe now, so that somehow makes me feel okay now, or I just haven't,
Yeah.
or maybe that's just how I feel, like experience safety is sort of like, oh, are there a bazillion stories all of a sudden and now there aren't as many and I don't live near that park or something.
And
This
like
is
part of
not,
me does
yeah.
wonder if, well, of course you're hearing about them. There's an increase, so now they're all
Yeah.
getting reported. I know that's kind of like a common narrative about like just hate crime in general.
Yeah, but I think but really this is how we sort of experience these things or like try to understand them. So I think it's
Yeah.
important. Like I guess on that sort of emotional, not necessarily rational level, I guess I feel okay. But would I walk, on a non-main street, like back in a neighborhood at
Especially when you don't know
3 a.m.
well.
alone?
Yeah.
No, probably not.
Yeah.
So
And I think it's important to acknowledge that Stephen and I, both being like cisgender white men, we're pretty protected by.
yeah, so would we be the canary in the coal mine? No.
Yeah, like I
Right.
think that walking down the street, if you walk with direct, like focused looking attention and
Yeah, and I think
you're
we're
not
both.
sloppy drunk, we're not going to get jumped probably.
Yeah, and I think we're both kind of the means where we're like, hey, if I feel really unsafe, I'm just gonna call a Lyft or an Uber.
But
And I
that's
think we
something that
both.
not everybody has access to.
Exactly. So I'm
Like your
saying,
phone could
okay,
die.
yeah, maybe I'm not even experiencing those nights at all
Yeah.
because I'm just like, oh, I have this little inkling, and then for me, I so often it's like $6 or something. That's something that I can then just do on a whim. I was
Yeah.
also gonna say, Matthew and I don't go out that much anymore.
Yeah, so if we're talking about like stumbling home drunk, being I don't want to victim blame here, but I think that there is a moment where perhaps you make yourself a little bit more of a target by appearing to be an
Yeah,
easy
like,
victim when you're stumbling home blind drunk after they've called
and
last call.
you can describe that because, well, at least I can because I've done it.
Yeah, like there is a point when, if you put five people together and you have to pick one of them to jump and steal their phone and do whatever else you're going to do to them, I'm not going to pick the four people who are like standing there coherently, like aware of their surroundings. I would pick the person who is like laying on the floor because they can't stand any longer. And I have a friend who, back when we lived in the U district, he got like pistol whipped repeatedly, like almost.
Repeatedly?
Yeah, like he would drink too much. But we were in our early 20s in college, and he would just like go out walking. Like he would take a nice long stroll home from the bars, like completely wasted, and he would get attacked semi regularly. And
Hmm.
it almost became a joke, which I feel disgusting to say, but it was like, oh yeah, he's not here today. Oh, did he get pistol whipped again? Because like we were all
Wow.
so stunned and concerned for his safety that that was like a thing that we couldn't get him to change.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
So I mean, I guess we
He's
could
doing well now. Like he's alive, he's healthy, he's happy.
like, yeah. So we
Yeah.
just say, yeah. I mean, for whatever this means for everyone's situation, it's like continue to try to make smart choices when you can.
Yeah.
Um,
Now, I mean, Stephen and I were kind of asking ourselves about this before we started recording, but like, how do we protect ourselves? How do we find a way that we stay safe? And I just kind of blurted out, well, I don't walk home by myself at like 1 a.m.
yeah.
But also, one, I don't really go out much anymore.
Yeah, so talking about trends, I mean, 95% decrease in us going out
Yeah.
between 2016 and now.
So but that's sort of like saying like abstinence is the only way to make sure that you never get pregnant or
Yeah,
get an STD.
exactly. So we're not saying don't go out at all. It's more like, What part of this is more theoretical and more just us reading now versus
Yeah.
experiencing? Okay, it's not like vanish. It's not like we don't go out. It's not like we don't walk at night.
We do actually have lives.
Yeah, and I'm routinely okay. This specific route happens where I'm walking back from Matthew's house, which is near many of the bars. The gay bars in Capitol Hill.
But it's like a
I'm
7-block walk.
Yeah, 7 block walk, and it's routinely between midnight and 1, right? Or between 11 and midnight or something. Or these times when, okay, it's maybe not the peak time when a lot of these crimes are, reported. I don't know that. I would imagine, though, it's later.
They
That's
seem
what
to
I
be
remember
later.
hearing. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like sort of after bar close or
Yeah.
something. Um,
But
yeah,
they can happen
these
at
are-
any time.
Whatever. And we're just trying to color our commentary. We're trying to sort of express where we're coming from, which is a very specific point of view.
I feel
right?
like
It's a
I'm-
very
I have probably been saved in a variety of situations. Just the fact that I'm not like a tall guy, but I'm a little taller than average, and I
Yeah.
have a pretty medium build. I don't think that I look like the kind of person who could be easily like overcome, or at least without putting up a fight. And I'm white, and
Yeah.
I walk quickly, like all gays.
Yeah, usually, I mean, you're probably not walking alone super often.
Yeah,
et
because
cetera.
like I usually have either like my boyfriend or the friends that I'm out with, which is an important thing that I think a lot of safety people have recommended is don't go by yourself, like have a buddy.
Yeah, and that, I mean, I think it's a lot harder if maybe are a young trans person who doesn't know anybody, right? Maybe you're
Yeah.
trying to make these connections. I mean, I definitely was doing that younger. Like, I just
Yeah.
moved here anyway, so
And
it's a lot. Yeah,
and if you're in one of the particularly high risk categories, like if you're a queer person of color, you're going to be targeted more according to the data and statistics. I wish that wasn't the case, but the numbers seem to indicate that it is a far less safe experience being a person of color, being a transgender person. Like,
Yeah,
there are
so-
just so many factors at play that don't even come into the daily reality that Stephen and I
yeah.
face.
Which is just to say exactly. We can't really speak for that, and
It's kind of
we
the
can
way
try
that
to
like
capture some of that, but
Yeah,
we kind of can't.
like we can never understand the experience of women the way that women have strategies of like how they hold their car keys when they go out to their car after work and it's dark and they have to cross a parking lot that's not well lit, or when they go on a run, what route do they take to make sure that they're never that far away from people who could hear them if something happened. Like all of these little things that women have to just build into their daily life to avoid harassment, we are just completely unaware of, which is just like the tip of the iceberg of things that we're not aware of that other people have to face.
So I mean, hopefully that speaks to our awareness of that. But
Well,
anyway,
learn your history, learn the things that are impacting your community, and do what you can to remain safe, to, look out for each other.
yeah, and you know what? Really, Capitol Hill in Seattle is great. Like, I don't mean to tell people like, oh, don't come here. Oh my God, but it's really, we're just trying to be aware of what's happening.
Yeah. We just wanted to share this because I think that there's a moment that we are in right now where Seattle is really queer friendly. So many businesses and community leaders support and like celebrate.
And we have an openly gay mayor.
Well, we did. Oh, we do now too.
We do now,
Yeah,
too.
thank
Yeah,
God that
2
we
in a
have her.
row.
Yeah, and isn't she our first female mayor since like the days when
Since someone,
Seattle wasn't really much of a thing?
Exactly.
Like black and
Seattle
white
was like
photos.
1.5 trading posts or something.
Yeah.
And some lady won, in a technicality but apparently she was really good.
Yeah, so now we have another female lesbian mayor, which is
Yeah.
great.
So, we don't
I've
want to
definitely
make it
voted
sound
for
like
her.
we're bleak. Yeah.
This is a great place to live. Not all of our listeners have that luxury, and that sucks. And even within our own community, not everybody is as safe as we are able to be just with the way that we exist and move through the world. And that really sucks. So yeah, please be safe, especially when you've been out drinking or doing whatever other intoxicating substances and having a good time and enjoying your friends and your found families and everything. But please just be aware that the world is not always amazing, And
please read about the Institut for Sexualwissenschaft.
Sexualwissenschaft.
At your earliest convenience.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
So I actually thought that some of the best coverage that I read was from Teen Vogue.
Really?
Yeah, like,
Okay.
they actually are being...
Teen Vogue?
Yeah. Their editorial staff, I think, has just decided that no one else in the media is doing things right. So they're, like...
hard-hitting, like sleuths of Teen Vogue.
But it's, like, really readable, which is nice.
Okay.
But, I've been kind of impressed.
Listen, if BuzzFeed can do it...
Literally anyone can. We're doing it.
Wow.
Yeah. Okay, so
Touché.
let's just be safe, look out for each other, and learn our history.
Okay, thanks for listening.
This is Plant Daddy Podcast with our supplement to our off-topic episode about Seattle Pride.